So how did we get here? How did we get to the point where a majority of immigration officers across continents, including Africa, feel that it's okay to treat people from my continent like second-class citizens of the world? After decolonization, African countries, for the most part, remained tethered to their colonialists. Nigeria to the UK, Angola to Portugal, Senegal to France. As a result, we collectively developed a fragmented sense of identity, considering our paths to Europe and the US before any connection to a neighboring country. Following the 60s, minimal intra-African trade occurred. But while African markets remained virtually sealed from one another, a vibrant channel of trade flourished between Africa and the Western world. This is the legacy of 20th century Africa, which still dictates our way of life today. Because I feel I have as much of a right to see and discover this planet as any other person. Unfortunately, Africans still face restrictions in traveling their own continent. A Somali citizen cannot travel to a single African country without a visa. US and UK citizens can travel to about 36, 35 African countries either visa-free or with visas on arrival. That Africans seem more tolerant to Westerners than they are to other Africans reflects a troubling bias, one that feeds the business pursuits and wanderlusts of Europeans and Americans, while starving Africans of their own right to see their own continent. For a Senegalese woman to travel to South Africa, she needs a visa, which might take 2 to 4 weeks to process. For a Nigerian man to travel from Nigeria to Cape Verde, both of which are countries in the same economic community at a similar distance as Madrid is to Hamburg, his total trip time will take 22 hours. He will begin in Lagos and then fly to Casablanca before flying down to Bissau and finally to Cape Verde. So what does the ridiculous nature of this journey show? Well, it demonstrates how a lack of infrastructural connectivity complements our lack of knowledge of one another. It's bad enough that the world makes it difficult for many of us to visit North and South America, Europe and Asia. It's even worse when we impose these restrictions on ourselves. It prevents the average African from wanting to discover the world. It allows for a missed global education for Africans. The decision to selectively restrict travel punishes people for the wrongdoings of a handful of citizens. It punishes people for the policies of presidents and dictators who harm their countries, and it predetermines who is more worthy of the world. How do we move forward constructively? Here are 3 suggestions. Infrastructure needs to be created so that travel within the African continent does not require a connecting flight through Europe or Turkey. African states need to have a thorough understanding of their industries so that trade with other African countries is meaningful, and so that business and bilateral agreements with the Chinese or the Americans actually benefits both parties. Finally, there needs to be a re-education on Africa and on Africans for Africans, culturally, historically, and economically. These conversations need to happen in classrooms as well as around dinner tables, which will in turn improve the quality of conversations in business and international forums. When all of the above happen, Africans will not need to pursue treacherous routes through the Mediterranean, risk being enslaved or auctioned, or inflict bodily harm in a desperate attempt to stay abroad. We as Africans are responsible for creating an Africa that is stable and that presents real growth opportunities. To be sufficiently curious about one another and to treat each other with respect. The solution to the mistreatment of Africans is in the hands of Africans. We as Africans are responsible for creating an Africa that is politically stable, intellectually empowered, and socioeconomically integrated. As recently stated by the President of Ghana, once African countries start taking themselves seriously, the world will follow. To realize that if an American citizen can travel visa-free to South Africa, then a citizen of Niger should be allowed the same right. And it is the responsibility of the rest of the world to resist the temptation to make fast money in Africa and to instead consider mutually beneficial long-term opportunities. And maybe, just maybe, together we can create a world that is more welcoming to Africans, not just Africans, but more importantly, one in which we Africans are welcoming to each other. Thank you.